On the morning of March 19, 1982, something went terribly wrong in the Florida sky. Witnesses said Randy Rhoads and the pilot were fighting for control of a small plane. Seconds before it clipped a tour bus and crashed into a nearby house, his bandmates were sleeping only yards away. Rhoads wasn't the reckless rock stereotype. At just 25, the quiet, classically trained guitarist had already transformed heavy metal alongside Ozzy Osbourne on Blizzard of Oz. His future was just beginning. So why did that plane take off? And what did his bandmates reveal after the crash that made the tragedy even darker? This is the story of a legend whose fate still doesn't make sense. When Randy Rhoads was born on December 6, 1956 in Santa Monica, music was already woven into his life. His parents were both music teachers, and their home was filled with instruments and students. But that harmony didn't last. Before Randy turned 2, his father left the family for another woman, and his mother was suddenly raising 3 children alone. Determined to survive, she opened a small music school in North Hollywood. That decision quietly shaped Randy's destiny. By age 7, he was taking lessons there, drawn to the electric guitar after falling in love with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. His instructor, Scott Shelley, soon approached Randy's mother with an unusual complaint. He couldn't teach him anymore. Not because Randy misbehaved, but because he'd already surpassed him. The student had become the master. Even so, talent didn't make middle school easier. At John Muir Middle School, Randy felt like an outsider. His only real friend was Kelly Garney. The two didn't fit in, and classmates made sure they knew it. Music became Randy's refuge, his escape from the noise of adolescence. Then, on July 11, 1971, everything changed. Randy attended an Alice Cooper concert at the Long Beach Auditorium. It wasn't just a show, it was a revelation. According to his brother, Randy stood there transfixed, almost motionless. In Alice Cooper's theatrical chaos, he saw a future for himself. And from that night on, he didn't just want to play guitar. He needed to. Randy Rhoads didn't waste time after high school. He moved quickly into teaching at his mother's music school, passing on what he already knew while quietly sharpening his own skills. But teaching wasn't enough. Before long, he pulled together a band with his old friend Kelly Garney, singer Kevin Dubrow, drummer Drew Forsythe, and himself on guitar. They called it Quiet Riot, and they began tearing through clubs across Los Angeles. Rhoads stood out instantly, and not just because of his playing. He had a quirky love for polka dots, on his jackets, his pants, even painted onto his guitar. Fans started copying the look, showing up to gigs in dotted clothes as a tribute. Quiet Riot built a loyal following on the L.A. scene, and record executives took notice. By 1976, the band had signed with CBS/Sony. They recorded 2 albums in 1978. But in a baffling move, the label released them only in Japan. Despite their popularity in Los Angeles, they couldn't get a proper American release. The pressure of recording so quickly, and the frustration over their stalled U.S. breakthrough, began to fracture the band. Tensions between Garney and Dubrow boiled over. One night, a drunk and enraged Garney reportedly fired a gun at Dubrow and later turned on Rhoads physically. He even confessed to Randy that he'd considered killing Dubrow at the studio. It was a terrifying escalation. For Randy, the choice was painful but unavoidable. He fired his childhood friend from the band. Not long after, bassist Dana Strum called with unexpected news. Ozzy Osbourne was in Los Angeles, freshly dismissed from Black Sabbath and looking to form a new group. Strum urged Randy to audition. At first, Randy wasn't interested. He was loyal to Quiet Riot and skeptical of Ozzy's chaotic reputation. But Strum kept pushing until Randy reluctantly agreed. What happened at the audition depends on who you ask. Randy later claimed he barely met Ozzy, saying Osbourne stayed in the control room and mostly heard him warming up. Ozzy, however, told a different story, that the moment Randy began playing, he was blown away. He even wondered if his own substance use was making the guitar sound better than it really was. According to Ozzy, he offered Randy the job on the spot. What's undeniable is what came next. Before Ozzy flew back to England, he jammed with Randy, Dana Strum, and drummer Frankie Banali. That session changed everything. Randy had planned to stay with Quiet Riot, but now the possibility of playing with an already famous frontman was hard to ignore. Quiet Riot still had no American record deal. Ozzy was a global name. Randy decided to take the leap, and that's when the real complications began. When Ozzy Osbourne returned to the UK, he brought Randy Rhoads' name to his management team. They weren't impressed. An unknown American guitarist wasn't what they had in mind. In fact, they were firmly against it. But Ozzy pushed. After some resistance, management reluctantly agreed to give the kid a shot. All Randy had to do now was get to England. That turned out to be more complicated than anyone expected. Randy made it safely from Los Angeles to London, but Heathrow Airport was another story. Customs officials quickly realized he didn't have the proper work permit. In their eyes, he wasn't a musician arriving for opportunity. He was someone trying to work illegally. Jet Records promised to send someone to sort it out. Randy waited and waited. No one came. Instead of heading to rehearsals, he spent the night detained at the airport. The next day, things escalated. Authorities handcuffed him and put him back on a plane to the United States. For a young guitarist who had just taken a massive career risk, it was humiliating, and it could have been the end of the Ozzy chapter before it even began. But then Ozzy called. He apologized for the chaos and assured Randy the paperwork would be handled properly this time. True to his word, the arrangements were fixed, and Randy flew back, this time with the correct documents. On November 27, 1979, he landed in London again and took a train to Bulrush Cottage, where Ozzy was living. That marked the real beginning. Randy moved in with Ozzy and his wife at the time, Thelma Riley. Soon, drummer Lee Kerslake, formerly of Uriah Heep, joined the lineup. To make it clear whose project this was, they called the band Blizzard of Oz. Randy was still largely unknown, but that was about to change. The first album built momentum in the UK, but it was Diary of a Madman that truly put Randy on the map. Guitar Player magazine readers voted him Best New Talent. Sounds magazine named him Best Heavy Metal Guitarist. His classical precision mixed with metal aggression made him impossible to ignore. Ozzy had found something rare. And then Randy made a move that didn't sit well with everyone. Despite his rising fame, he agreed to reunite with Quiet Riot for a one-night show at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles. It may have been nostalgic for him, but for Ozzy's camp, it was a red flag. Sharon Arden, Ozzy's manager and girlfriend at the time, reportedly made it very clear that couldn't happen again. And what made it even more complicated was something few people fully understood at the time. During one break on tour, Randy Rhoads and Sharon Arden went out for drinks to unwind. One thing led to another, and the night crossed a line neither of them could ignore. They ended up in bed together, a secret that would later carry enormous weight, considering Sharon would eventually become Sharon Osbourne. Ironically, that brief relationship may have protected Randy's place in the band. As the Blizzard of Oz prepared for a major U.S. tour, there was a short pause in the schedule. When Randy returned, he was blindsided. Sharon had fired drummer Lee Kerslake and bassist Bob Daisley, two of Randy's closest friends and key contributors to the band's sound. Officially, it was business. Unofficially, some wondered whether Sharon kept Randy on because of their personal history. Randy didn't see it that way. He was furious. As legal disputes began brewing over songwriting credits and royalties from Diary of a Madman, Randy felt caught in the middle. He even confided to Kerslake that he was thinking about quitting in solidarity. Kerslake, however, urged him not to sabotage his own future. "Stay," he told him. "Don't throw it away." So Randy stayed and walked straight toward tragedy. By early 1982, he was already questioning his path. Heavy metal fame wasn't what he had imagined. He spoke openly about returning to classical guitar, maybe even enrolling at UCLA to formally study music. On tour, he sought out classical instructors in whatever city they landed in. It wasn't a phase. He was searching for something different. Meanwhile, life on the road with Ozzy was exhausting. Ozzy's drinking had grown worse, making rehearsals unpredictable and shows unstable. Some nights he refused to go on stage at all. Crew members scrambled to manage the chaos. Cancellations became more common. For someone as disciplined and musically serious as Randy, the instability was draining. Then came another breaking point. In February 1982, management announced plans for a live album made up entirely of Black Sabbath songs to be recorded at Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens. Randy and drummer Tommy Aldridge were clear. They didn't want to do it. They had helped build something new with Ozzy. They didn't want to revisit the past. Ozzy, however, didn't take no lightly. Ozzy Osbourne was determined to move forward with the live Black Sabbath album, and Randy Rhoads' refusal only fueled the tension between them. Ozzy pushed hard, trying to pressure both Randy and drummer Tommy Aldridge into agreeing. When they stood firm, he lashed out, throwing around the names of possible replacements like Gary Moore and even Frank Zappa, hoping the threat alone would scare them into compliance. It didn't. Frustrated and drinking more heavily, Ozzy's temper spiraled. At one point, though he later claimed he had no memory of it, he reportedly fired the entire band in a burst of anger. Whether he meant it or not, the damage was done. For Randy, it confirmed what he had already been feeling. This situation was no longer healthy, creatively or personally. He knew he had to leave, but walking away wasn't simple. Randy still owed Jet Records another album and a full tour. There were contracts to honor, commitments to finish, and as part of that obligation, he reluctantly agreed to participate in the Black Sabbath live recording he had resisted in the first place. Freedom was on the horizon, but it was still months away. Tragically, he would never reach it. Despite the strain between them, the tour rolled on. On March 18, 1982, the band performed in Knoxville, Tennessee. The next stop was Orlando, Florida, where they were scheduled to appear at a festival called Rock Super Bowl. They traveled overnight by bus, but along the way, a problem forced them to stop. The air conditioning had failed. In the early morning hours of March 19th, the bus pulled into Flying Baron Estates in Leesburg, Florida, a property that included a private airstrip and a small lake. While Ozzy and Tommy Aldridge stayed on the bus to sleep, others stepped outside to stretch their legs and look around. That's when the bus driver made a decision that would change everything. Parked at Flying Baron Estates was a small collection of light aircraft and helicopters. The tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock, was also a licensed pilot. Seeing the planes sitting there, he decided it would be fun to take one up for a quick spin. He invited keyboardist Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan to join him for a short joyride. He never asked permission to use the aircraft. Once in the air, Aycock came up with what he apparently thought was a harmless prank. He began flying low over the tour bus, trying to buzz it and wake up the band members who were still sleeping inside. It was reckless, but for those in the plane, it may have felt thrilling. Randy Rhoads stayed on the ground during those first passes. He had always been uneasy about flying, and he likely felt relieved not to be part of it. But the danger wasn't over. After a couple of low swoops, Aycock landed safely. Instead of stopping there, he decided to go again. This time, he asked makeup artist Rachel Youngblood to join him. Rhoads still hesitated. He didn't like small planes. Aycock reportedly reassured him, saying that because Rachel had a heart condition, he wouldn't do anything risky. Eventually, Randy agreed to get on board. Once the plane was airborne again, it became clear that the promise of caution meant little. Aycock resumed flying low over the bus, trying once more to startle the people inside. He made one pass, then another. Around 10 a.m., he lined up for a third flyover. That's when everything went wrong. Don Airey was back on the ground, holding a camera with a telephoto lens, snapping photos of the small plane circling above. As he looked through the lens, something caught his attention. It appeared that there was movement inside the cockpit, almost like a struggle between Rhoads and Aycock. As the plane descended for its third pass, Airey suddenly realized it was coming straight toward him. He dropped to the ground just in time. He later estimated the plane was only about 6 feet above the ground as it roared overhead. When he looked up, he saw the wing clip the tour bus. What happened next was instant and catastrophic. When the plane's wing struck the tour bus, it shattered on impact. The aircraft immediately lost control and began to spin. Inside the cockpit, the force of the collision was violent. Randy Rhoads and Rachel Youngblood were thrown forward with such intensity that their heads went through the windshield glass. But the crash was still unfolding. After clipping the bus, the plane tore through the top of a pine tree, shearing it off before slamming into the garage of a nearby mansion. For a split second, there may have been a chance of survival. Then the aircraft exploded into flames. The blast was loud enough to wake everyone still sleeping on the tour bus. Ozzy Osbourne later said that when he first heard the explosion, he assumed another vehicle had hit them. There was confusion, shouting, people scrambling to understand what had happened. Then the realization hit. A plane had gone down, and members of their own tour family had been on board. They rushed toward the wreckage, but there was nothing they could do. The plane was completely engulfed in fire. Osbourne recalled that it took about 30 minutes for emergency vehicles to arrive, and when one finally showed up, it was a small fire truck that seemed painfully inadequate against the blaze. By the time the flames were extinguished, the scene was devastating. The fire had been so intense that identifying the victims was nearly impossible. Authorities later relied on dental records and Randy's distinctive jewelry to confirm his identity. Sharon Osbourne would later say the wreckage was unrecognizable. Just body parts everywhere. Those who survived were left standing there, forced to process something almost too horrific to comprehend. Legend has it that bassist Rudy Sarzo wandered into a church later that night, overwhelmed with grief. The place was nearly empty, silent except for one man crying out in anguish. Sarzo heard him shout, "Why? Why?" and instantly recognized the voice. It was Ozzy Osbourne. Before long, the rest of the world learned the terrible news, but not in the most compassionate way. This was 1982, long before careful notification protocols were standard. Randy Rhoads' girlfriend was driving when she noticed something strange. Every song on the radio seemed to be from Blizzard of Oz. Then the DJ broke in with the announcement about the crash. That was how she found out. The aftermath was just as horrible, Rudy Sarzo later said about Randy Rhoads' death. Leaving the crash site and returning to the road felt unreal. The shock hadn't even settled in before something else took hold. Survivor's guilt. It hit them immediately and hard. Ozzy Osbourne didn't handle it well. He tried to drown the grief in alcohol and drugs, spiraling at a time when the band was already shattered. Sharon, who was then his manager and would later become his wife, stepped in and forced order into chaos. Many believe the tour would have ended that very day if she hadn't pushed Ozzy to keep going. In the middle of that grief, the band had to find a replacement guitarist. Bernie Torme, known for his work with Ian Gillan of Deep Purple, stepped in temporarily. Later, Night Rangers' Brad Gillis took over. Ozzy's career not only survived, it exploded. Sharon's did too. Together, they built an empire. But success never erased that morning in Florida. More than 4 decades later, Ozzy has admitted he still sees it clearly. To this day, as I'm talking to you now, I'm back in that field looking at that plane wreck and a house on fire, he told Rolling Stone. You never get over something like that. In another reflection, he put it even more simply. The day that Randy Rhoads died was the day a part of me died. As investigators pieced together what had happened, disturbing details began to surface. Andrew Aycock, the bus driver who had taken the plane up, had a troubling aviation history. His pilot's license had expired. He had previously been involved in a fatal aviation accident overseas. On top of that, reports suggested he had been severely sleep-deprived and possibly affected by drugs that morning. His personal life was also unraveling. His marriage was ending, and his wife, Wanda Hears, was actually on the tour bus he kept buzzing. That's where the darkest theory begins. Aycock had claimed he was flying low simply to wake up the sleeping band members, but witnesses later said Hears was standing in the doorway of the bus during that final pass. Some have speculated that Aycock's reckless flying may have had a far more sinister motive, that he intended to crash into the bus deliberately. It's impossible to prove, but it does align with one haunting detail. Keyboardist Don Airey, watching from the ground through his camera lens, said he saw what looked like a physical struggle inside the cockpit just before impact. Some believe Randy may have realized what was happening and tried to stop it. If that's true, then Randy Rhoads didn't just die in a tragic accident. He may have gone down fighting. Today, his influence remains undeniable. Rolling Stone ranked him number 36 on its list of the 100 greatest guitarists of all time. Guitar World placed him number 4 among the greatest heavy metal guitarists. Jackson Guitars created a signature model in his honor, and his mother, Dolores Rhoads, established the Randy Rhoads Scholarship Endowment to support aspiring guitarists. More than 4 decades later, his riffs still echo, his solos still inspire, and his legacy still burns far brighter than the flames that took him.